by tension against America making it too dangerous for U.S. diplomats overseas, the U.S. embassies in Djibouti and Saudi Arabia temporarily closed in light of ongoing threats. Caroline Kennedy, the U.S. ambassador to Japan, has received multiple death threats after the U.S. ambassador to South Korea was attacked in Seoul. I want to turn to Armand Cucciniello. He's a former U.S. diplomat, served 4 years as the spokesman for the U.S. Embassy in Iraq, served in Pakistan as well. Good to see you this morning, and you're the man to talk about it. These two cases that we've seen, the actual attack on Ambassador Lippert in South Korea, and then the threats against Caroline Kennedy in Tokyo. Do you draw a line, a continuation there? Do you think there's a connection?
Not necessarily. Just because they've taken place in the same region in East Asia doesn't mean that there's a direct correlation, because two U.S. ambassadors have had threats on their life.
But it is a concern that these are not necessarily places where Americans are poorly viewed. There's a good relationship with those nations.
Absolutely, and these jobs comes with risks, regardless of the location. So whether it's Iraq or Pakistan or Korea or Japan, that doesn't mean that there's not potential for violence.
Generally, given your experience, how safe are men and women of the Foreign Service overseas? I mean, do you feel adequately secure when you're abroad?
I always have, quite frankly. I spent 4 years in Iraq at the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad.
Subsequent
to that, I was in the thick of it, yes, during the surge, before the surge, after the surge, and at the U.S. Embassy in Islamabad in Pakistan, including during when Osama bin Laden was killed. I always felt safe, that there certainly were flare-ups in terms of violence and the potential to be attacked. However, the diplomatic security always did a great job, I felt, in protecting us. And incidences like these with Caroline Kennedy and Ambassador Lippert, we tend to hear about in the news, but we forget that most days in the year, diplomats are safe.
But the fact is, you are going to Pakistan and Iraq knowing likely what you are potentially up against.
Yes,
arguably in Korea, in South Korea, and in Tokyo, you wouldn't anticipate anything like that.
True, it's not expected in Korea or in Tokyo, but as I like to say, terror threat is real and it's global.
Yeah.
So a diplomat, I believe, shouldn't feel any safer these days in Rome or in London than they should in Baghdad or Islamabad.
Should they generally feel less safe then?
As a U.S. official, there's a bit of a mark on us, I would say.
Yeah. I want to point to a State Department Inspector General report that was done last year assessing the Threat Programs Division, which is charged with dealing with diplomatic security. And it said many improvements really had been made since that horrifying Benghazi attack.
Right.
Yet still, they talked about staffing gaps, they talk about position shortages, about not having authority to enforce implementation on foreign soil often, and some confusion about that. Did you see those things happen, and do you think they're significant enough and that they're being addressed?
Well, they definitely should review the security posture at all U.S. embassies, which the State Department does take very seriously, and they're in the process of doing that, as you correctly pointed out. The embassy in Djibouti, I think it was yesterday, was announced that they're going to be closing for a security review. So when the Inspector General does these types of assessments, the State Department takes it seriously and then reviews the security posture, which for every country is different.
And the fact that the threat to Americans overseas and to our foreign service men and women has evolved over even just the last 10 years, since even when you started.
Right.
The service has to evolve and how it manages it, and also the men and women that it attracts. Is it evolving, do you think, to the right level? Is it keeping up with the level of the threat?
Yes. New embassy complexes, or new embassy compounds, as they tend to be called, have been built over the past 2 decades, I believe, since the embassy attacks in Africa. So the State Department and the U.S. government has always taken seriously the protecting diplomats and determining new ways in order to mitigate risk and get ahead. Absolutely. And sometimes this puts diplomats in confined spaces, you might say, and prohibits us or them from doing their job at times. But protecting people is number one.
Yeah.
You can't do your job if you're not alive.
No. Did you enjoy your service?
I did. I liked it a lot.
Thank you very much for it. Thank you for serving so boldly for the nation overseas for 8 years. My goodness. Thank you so much. Armand Cucciniello. John?
All right. Thanks, Michaela. It is one of the most exhilarating experiences in the world, reaching the peak of Mount Kilimanjaro. I am not nearly brave enough to try it. Thank goodness we have someone who is. Brooke Baldwin, alive, back from the mountain, here to tell us about her emotional journey next. Places, the things that I did.